And welcome to another Seize the Day. As you can tell, I'm not at home. Actually, I'm in Philadelphia on my way back home. Yesterday, after I did the Seize the Day, I boarded a plane and flew out to Philadelphia, where I met with some missionaries from Nigeria, um, uh, a, um, a, an acquaintance that had been working in Nigeria for, quite a good part of his career. Worked for Wycliffe, translating the scriptures into the Azeri language for Nigeria, and then also went back to school, got a doctorate in, in a study called. Actually, I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. Um, Studying post conversion follow up. In other words, when after people become believers, what's the best way to track them along in their discipleship development? And it was a topic that I thought would be very apropos for what we're trying to do at Bethany, as we're trying to be disciples who make disciples. And I thought, well, you could always learn more about what that means and how we can go about doing that. And so I came, and it was a short little flight. Got an opportunity to sit down and talk to him, got some of his thoughts on this subject. And while I was here in Philly, I also went to the seminary that I graduated from, and saw a couple of fellow classmates. Haven't seen some of them in about 40 years. So it was really great to see so many of them still serving the Lord, and very vibrant ministries, some in pretty tough areas here in Philadelphia. But it was great just to be around them and listen to the stories that God has been, doing in their lives. So glad to do that. Gonna, as soon as I finish here, gonna be boarding a plane back to New Hampshire in a very short while. But I thought, hey, I got this room, and why not use it? Here we are this morning, live from Philadelphia. We're in a study called the Songs of Ascent, Psalm 120 through 134. These were psalms that were used on the journey to celebrate the holy feast days that God called for in Jerusalem. And we have been preaching them on the weekends. So if you go to our website, bethanychurch.com, there you will find the sermon that was being preached that's on Sunday. In this particular week, you'll find that Brett Olson, one of our fine young men, he did an excellent job in preaching through Psalm 125. So that's where we will be this morning, Psalm 125, and in particular, what I wanted you to see is some of the comments that come from this psalm, and there were a number of points that we made yesterday at the close of our time together. So if you would, what I'd like to do is just read Psalm 125 to you, and then we'll pick up our time here together. So Psalm 125 says, "Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be shaken, but endures forever. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people, both now and forevermore. The scepter of the wicked will not remain over the land allotted to the righteous, for then the righteous might use their hands to do evil. Do good, O Lord, to those who are good, to those who are upright in heart. But those who turn to crooked ways, the Lord will banish with the evildoers. Peace be upon Israel." So here is this psalm that's extolling the virtues, right, of those who trust in the Lord. So if you look again at verse 1, this is all about those who trust in the Lord and the position that they maintain before God. They're going to be like Mount Zion, which cannot be shaken but endures forever. And then, as a parallel to this word, it says, as the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people both now and forevermore. So God is the one who is protecting them. That those who trust in the Lord are going to find themselves like Mount Zion. Poetry, as we have been looking over these passages now for quite some time, poetry is very condensed language, and it uses a lot of metaphors, very emotive, right? Because poetry is meant to say a lot in few words. Poetry is really meant here to place us in a position where we are not only reading the Psalms, but we're feeling the Psalms. And so in 5 short verses, there's a lot that has been shared here. For instance, it says that that they are a protected people, right? They're not going to be shaken. They're going to be like Mount Zion. They're also they're a believing community, right? It's a people now who have demonstrated their allegiance to God. It says, as the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people, both now and forevermore, right? So they are trusting in him. They are not to be shaken. They will endure. And it goes on, it says, but it appears here in verse 3 that they're also a threatened community. And why is that? Because there is this conflict that seems to remain. The scepter of the wicked will not remain over the land allotted to the righteous. So there is, evidently, they're experiencing some of this pain. We know this is Psalms that were written around during the times of the exile. So, imagine being taken out of your land, the temple being destroyed, everything now about your life is in a complete upheaval, foreign land, under foreign rules, and you're wondering if God is in any of this. And yet people have forgotten that the reason why they found themselves in those circumstances is because of their idolatry. They no longer kept covenant with God, and God was then under no obligation to keep covenant with them. Although what we find, isn't it true that even though we may be faithless, God always remains faithful. And so what does he do? For the sake of the remnant, God was going to bring these people back into their land. God is going to make sure that they are going to rest secure. And so what is the promise then made to this threatened community right now? He's saying, look, the scepter of the wicked will not remain over the land allotted to the righteous. So those who have taken over Jerusalem, right, the Babylonians, they're not going to ultimately prevail. There were simply tools in God's hands to do what? To bring justice, to remind them again of their first love, of their calling. How many times has God used circumstances like that in our lives, where all of a sudden, we are made keenly aware of the consequences of our actions, and you wish you had like this eraser that you could just come and just erase whatever it is that just took place, right? Untie some of those knots that we have tied pretty securely. You wish you could go back, but you can't. You're suffering the consequences now of one's sin. And how overwhelming would that be if there was no grace that was involved in that? But God comes along and says, listen, you don't have to be defined by your past. You can be defined by your future. And so he's telling them now, those who trust in the Lord are going to be like Mount Zion. You're not going to be shaken. You're going to endure forever. But you see, the emphasis here is now on trust, something that they had lost. And now they so desperately want to regain. And God's saying, listen, I understand. If you stay in this condition too long, the effects of this evil are going to find its way of just seeping into your heart and from that heart are going to come all kinds of sinful thoughts and actions, and it's only a matter of time before you're giving birth to them, and you're living in a way that is betraying your allegiance to Him. So God says, listen, I'm not going to let you stay in this situation forever. I will deliver you. And so that's why He says, that the scepter of the wicked is not going to remain over you forever. But I'm going to take care of the righteous. And yet, look at verses 4 and 5. Do good, O Lord, to those who are good, to those who are upright in heart. But to those who turn to crooked ways, the Lord will banish with the evildoers. So, you see how there is a sifting that is taking place here. There is a way in which God is going to reward the righteous, and He's going to condemn the wicked. God is the only one who is qualified to do that judgment. And yet, as we look at this text, there is this juxtaposition, right, between those who do good and those who turn to crooked ways. And so, in 5 verses, we're told a mouthful here. We're living in a divided community. We have to pay close attention lest that community begins to influence the way in which we look at ourselves, the way in which we look at the world, the way in which perhaps we begin to forget the great and precious promises that God has given to us. Because here is the ultimate promise. If you trust in the Lord, He says you will not be shaken, and you will endure forever. So this whole idea of God's provision and His power being manifested in the lives of those who trust Him, that was worth singing about. But here's another little thought that I thought would just amplify a little bit more about what we're doing here. Mount Sinai is also called Horeb. If you remember text, like for instance, in Exodus chapter 17, verse 6, it says, God is speaking to Moses and says, I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock and water will come out of it for people to drink. So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of the Lord. It says that the Israelites stripped off their ornaments at Mount Horeb in Exodus 33. It's Mount Horeb was the place, right? Mount Sinai, also called Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb as another reference to the same place. It says is where the law is given to Israel through Moses, and God calls it the mountain of God, right? That's what you read early on when God comes to Moses in that burning bush. Remember the story of Moses tending sheep, and he wanders off, sees this bush burning but not being consumed, and it says he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And one time in Numbers, we read this again, but its height and physical appearance are not so much are unimportant, and are not given the specific identification of where exactly this mount was, but its location in a wilderness where food and water were scarce inevitably brings to mind images, right, of the harshness of this land. But in the middle of this desert, there stood Mount Sinai. So the primary meaning of Sinai has to do with it being the place of revelation, where God meets Israel. It was this temporary junction where heaven and earth would come together. God would come down, and it says that the cloud would cover that mountain, and there would be lightning and thunder, and God called Moses to this place. where he would begin to reveal to him his will for his people, what God was about to, promise them in terms of a covenant. It's where God gave them the Ten Commandments. So think about this. Mount Sinai then is this place where God is meeting Israel and beginning to divulge, his will and purpose. And so it is holy ground. And when the people arrive at Sinai, which was the goal of the Exodus, right? God had told them that he was, going to take them out of this land and bring them to Mount Sinai, where he was going to give them this law, right? It's back all the way back in Exodus chapter 3. He says they are to accordingly consecrate themselves, before the Lord. And after God, as pictured as living above the heavens, comes down to this mountain, only Moses, goes up. And something that begins to take place. God reveals to Moses the Ten Commandments, the rest of the law, and also in response to Moses' request, God is going to reveal himself to him. There's this passage in Exodus 33, and it says, Moses says to the Lord, "You have been telling me, lead these people." This is in Exodus chapter 33. He says, Moses said to the Lord, "You have been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. And if you are pleased with me, teach me your ways so that I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people." And the Lord replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Moses said to him, "If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. For how will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other peoples on the face of the earth?" Do you catch that? Moses is now in Mount Sinai, and God has just told him, Moses says, "Listen, we're not going to leave this mountain unless you go with us. Because how are the nations around us going to know that you truly sent us, that you are really with us, if they don't see you with us?" And God is saying, I'm going to come with you, but you're going to see me in a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of cloud during the day. It would be this experience now that would forever mark their journey through this wilderness. And I don't know how that looked like. In your mind's eye, you can begin to create this whole movie scene in your head. Like, how tall was that fire? How big was that pillar of smoke? What did it look like to the people? It was something that you would just become so used to after a while that you just fail to really be taken back by its majesty. I once had a job working on top of the World Trade Centers. My job was to audit the income that came into the restaurant, and my office literally was on the 106th floor of the World Trade Center, and I had a window. Actually, it was a series of windows that lined that building, but my desk was right up against that window, and you could look down 106 floors. I remember when I first walked into that office space, it was majestic. I mean, you were way up above the city, limits, and where my office space was right on the East River, so I'm looking down on all the bridges that were spanning, the East River. I remember being there during the wintertime and seeing some of the big blocks of ice, that would be broken up so that, the boats and shipping lanes could be kept open. It was just majestic. But after working there for a while, you just got used to it. It was like part of the scenery. And I wonder sometimes, we handle sacred things with that same, kind of casualness. And yet, here in our text today, God is referring to those who trust in the Lord like Mount Zion, a place where God is going to meet with his people. Sinai is a promise of God's constant presence. Sinai is a place where God has given revelation to Moses, and it would play such a significant, role in its history. And it would stand above all of the nations that would surround them. God says, if you put into practice what you hear me say this day to you, it will go well with you and your children that come after you. And this whole context then is one in which you begin to see how it would begin to set the tone for the entire nation of Israel. God coming down on this mountain and giving him his words so that they then would go out and live not only with a sense of security in him, but that they would endure forever. I don't know if it's ever occurred to you, but do you remember the famous sermon that Jesus gave? What do we call that? We call that the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus, ascends and then sits down and addresses all those who have come. And he gives them what? Revelation. He gives them the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And in the case of Jesus now, he comes so that the kingdom of heaven the door would be open to all of those who do what? Who trust in him. Isn't that taking you way back again to this Psalm 125? A people who are now protected, a believing community. Those who trust in the Lord, they're going to be like Mount Zion. They're going to be like this place where they're going to meet with God. That there is this communion that's going to take place. That lives are going to be built on a revelation that will certainly come true. That will take them from this life into the one to come. And God's promise, his covenant, would be with them. The Apostle Paul is going to develop this allegory using Sinai and Jerusalem, that's representing an old covenant and God working in this new covenant. What God did in the Old Testament is now finding its fulfillment in what Jesus is doing for us in this New Testament. And so this imagery really, really comes forward. Can I take you to a passage here in Galatians chapter 4? If you look in Galatians chapter 4, there's just about 10 verses that I'd just like to read to you here. And there's this contrast that the Apostle Paul is drawing. He says, tell me, you who want to be under the law, are you not aware of what the law says? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one of the slave women and the other by the free woman, right? Isaac and Ishmael. His son by the slave woman was born in the ordinary way, but his son by the free woman was born as the result of a promise. Yeah, Isaac was born when Isaac was 100. God obviously fulfilled the promise there in a miraculous way. He goes, these things may be taken figuratively, for the women represent two covenants. One covenant is from Mount Sinai, and it bears children who are to be slaves. This is Hagar. Now, Hagar stands for Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present city of Jerusalem because she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem that is above is free, and she is our mother. It says, "Be glad, O barren woman who bears no children. Break forth and cry aloud, you who have no labor pains, because more are the children of the desolate than those of her who have a husband." And it's going to be true, right? The children that will be born from Abraham and Sarah, they would be the descendants that will one day become the nation of Israel. The descendants of Abraham would be from every nation, tribe, tongue of the world. We are children then of this covenant promise, and we stand like Mount as secure as Mount Sinai. It says, "Now you brothers, like Isaac, are children of the promise." Now you brothers are like children of the promise. At that time, the son born in the ordinary way was persecuted the son born by the power of the Spirit. And it is the same now. But what does the scripture say? Get rid of the slave woman and her son, for the slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with the free woman's son. Therefore, brothers, we are not children of the slave, but children of the free woman. It may be a little confusing, but let me just clarify this for a moment. They are looking at Mount Sinai for what it represented in terms of the law that God was bringing down. And instead of looking at the promise that really was brought through their obedience to God's covenant. God is wanting you and me to not just claim a relationship with God, but to trust in Him. If our lives then are reflective of all that God is doing in our life, it says you will endure forever. You will not be shaken. And even though there is this conflict right now that we're living through, you're going to get through this because the Lord is with you. This is precisely what these passages have been teaching us, right? Do good, and the prayer is, Lord, do good to those who are good, for those who are upright in heart. It's a great position to be in, to make sure that we are seeking after Him, strong like Mount Zion, and secure like the mountains that surround Jerusalem. Well, my friends, thanks for spending a little bit more time with me today. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of the themes that we find here in 125 the rest of this week. There's a couple of really neat parables of Jesus that I'd like to have us consider as we're talking about this subject. But on today, Tuesday, August the 13th, I trust that you guys have a great day, that it finds you doing well, seizing the day, and remembering that God is good all the time. Well, now I have to leave the city of brotherly love and come to New Hampshire. So God bless you, my friends. Lord willing, I'll see you tomorrow.